The American Association of University Women Educational Foundation and the Dayton Historical Depot Society present Living in Dayton, a local production by Dayton residents that documents the lives of women from early Columbia County families that shaped the community of Dayton, Washington. Following this interview is information on how you can purchase copies of this series, Living in Dayton.
When did you come to Dayton?
It was 1916, about 2 years before World War I.
And you went to school here for a while, right?
Yes, I went to school in Sandpoint. I went to school I don't know how many different schools I went to, but I went to school in Sandpoint, and then I went to school here.
So tell about quitting school and going to work.
Well, my grandmother passed away, and my mother went back to the funeral. And so while she was gone, I quit school.
Here in Dayton?
Here in Dayton. And I went to work. My mother told me, she says, well, when she got back, I had quit school. And she said, all right, if you go quit school and don't want to go on, you've got to go to work. So I went to work in the phone office, and I worked there for quite a while, in about 2 years, when it was over on Main Street. And I worked.
Tell me about some of the people that you dated when you came to Dayton.
Oh, well, I went with Jean Romaine quite a while, and Kenneth Corbett, and Zeke Blythe, and let's see, who else was it I went with when I was...
Now, who had a car that you kind of liked?
Oh, Jean Romaine had this car. It was a Jeffrey, and it had a top on it that you could take off, you know, and then you could put it on for the winter time, which was a real nice deal. And I enjoyed he was a good person. In fact, all the boys I went with was pretty good kids. Well, I went with Earl McGee, too. But he liked my sister better.
How did you meet Grandpa?
Oh, well, that was after the World War I. And my friend Goldie Thompson, had an aunt that wanted, she kind of liked Dewey. And so they were all the kids come back from the war, and they were going to some dance or something, and Goldie, that was my friend, had to babysit. So Dewey came in, I suppose after Mrs. Thompson, because her husband had passed away. And so there I met Dewey. And from then on, he used to kind of linger around the phone office about time for me to get off. And then he had the restaurant across the street.
What was it called?
Let's see.
Wasn't that the Club Cafe?
Yes, that was the Club Cafe. And so all the school teachers boarded with him. And I used to order a shrimp salad, because he really made good salads. And so he would always bring that up to me. And I got quite well acquainted with him, and so he just started going with me. And that's the way we went.
When were you married?
August the 21st. No, 1921, and August the 20th.
Right.
Yeah.
And where were you married?
In Spokane, at some friend's house that he was a telephone man. And then we went to Priest Lake afterwards. And, well, we stayed at the old Davenport Hotel, room number 122. And it was rough times. We didn't have too much, because it was right during the 1929 Depression. And we had kind of rough going, too, because he had, the rest of the family was all miners, all but Mina. And she had his mother, and then he had Dorsey and I. Well, it wasn't very good times for us. Oh, we raised turkeys and chickens and sheep and hogs and everything in the book to try to make it, but pretty tough.
Tell about some of the things you did for entertainment, like the Grange plays.
Oh yes, we knew it was in the Grange play, and he was a piano tuner, and Mrs. Edgar Barclay, he thought he was in love with her, and we went all over the county on those Grange deals, it was Farm Bureau then.
Uh-huh.
And then we used to go up to Turner, because Dewey's grandmother was a Turner,
Uh-huh.
and she had a lot of people up there at Turner that knew him. So we used to go to Mr. Charlie Morris's, and they had bought a new radio, and they were going. The band from Dayton was going to go to Walla Walla and play, so they wanted us to come up and listen to it. And we listened to it, but we could only one of it at a time because it had earphones. And while I was out at the ranch, there was we hadn't been married too long, and there was a Indian lady and the two children came down through the whetstone, and so Dewey had planted about 4 acres of corn, and it was nice corn, and so the old Indian lady wanted to pick it, and the kids would help her. So Dewey, he said, all right, go ahead, and you can pick the corn. So when they got through, in the meantime, while they were there, I used to go down through the barn lot. They pitched their teepee right in the barn lot there because it was close to the watering trough. And so I come through the barn lot there one time, and this old Indian lady asked me if I didn't want to come in and have supper with them. So I thought, well, that'd be pretty nice. And I went in there, and she had a blanket all spread out for me to sit. And, on that, right in the middle of the teepee, they had this fire going, and a big salmon fish was cooking. And I'll tell you, that was the best salmon I ever ate. It was just delicious. And so when they got through, they wanted to settle up, so Dewey went down and he said, ask him how much she owed him. So she said, well, the buggy in the old shed there, they all had a machine shed, and he says, we'll take the buggy. So Dewey said, all right, you can have the buggy to pay for picking the corn. So the last I saw of them, they were going down the whetstone, all 3 of them in the front seat in the buggy, because it didn't have a top on it. It just had the seat for them.
Uh-huh.
And so they went on down the whetstone in their buggy. I never did see them anymore after that.
Tell about the hog butchering.
Well, I was awful sick then because, gee, it was the first time we butchered. We had 8 hogs, and all the neighbors used to come in around and, go to the hog killing time. And Dewey's dad would dip his finger down in. He could tell how hot the water was if he could reach it down. And that was when they'd scald the hog, and then so they'd scrape them off. And there was an old fella by the name of I forgot what his name was, but anyway, he was a pretty good hog butcher. And Mrs. Pryor, he'd come down and help me. I was kind of sick, and she'd come down and she helped me, and she canned all the sausage and canned the bacon, put the bacon in the smokehouse, and ham, and she was just a jewel.
When was it that you had to leave the ranch? Wasn't that about 1929?
Yes, it was right during the, well, it was a little bit, well, we was through the Depression, and we went to California then, and went back to,
Pop had a job with the phone company in California.
yes, and
But
then
you
they
didn't-
were laying off all the men during the Depression, especially the ones that had just started, which Dewey had just started with them. And so we decided we'd come back to Dayton.
Uh-huh.
Or we came back to Walla Walla, and Dewey worked for Marvin McCauley at the penitentiary.
Uh-huh.
And he worked there at the penitentiary for about 11 years.
Uh-huh.
And then we came to Dayton, and Dewey had worked out at the labor camp up here. And there was a little fella there, a Mexican from Mexico, and he didn't want to go back to Mexico. So he said to John, he says, if you want to stay, you can work for me. And so we bought the cafe, Babe's Cafe, and the little Mexican fellow stayed and helped us all one winter. And we wanted to raise the counter and fix that, so we did.
And this was where?
Down here in Dayton, at Babe's Cafe,
Uh-huh. And what did you call it?
Dorsey's.
Uh-huh. And you opened in 1945, isn't that right?
I think right around there.
Uh-huh.
And we run that place for over 30 years.
Well,
You
tell
know-
a little bit about how you began and what you bought it for, and paying it off.
Oh yes, we bought it from, old Hanson, Gus Hanson, had a mortgage on it. So Dewey paid off the mortgage. And Gus wanted to sell the ice cream. So Dewey bought his ice cream. And Dewey borrowed $5,000, and we had paid it off in 6 months. So we had really, and the OPA was going strong then, and we had,
You had a little problem with the pricing at the beginning.
yes, they had prices on everything. I think a bowl of mush was 10 cents or something like that. So we really had but we made money there.
Who did the cooking?
Well, there was Mona Hurst and Bess Tucker,
Uh-huh.
and then of course we had several, and Mr. Oh, he was cooking down there. I forget what his name was. Then later on we had Jim Beatty, which was there. He
Uh-huh.
was with us about 8 years, and then,
What did Grandpa do there?
well, Grandpa more or less retired because Dorsey was.
Well, in the beginning he didn't, though.
No, he cooked for a while and kind of supervised things, and as long as Jim was there, Jim made us quite a bit of money. He was pretty good at managing in the kitchen. And of course, Dewey cut his own meat, and we had a pretty good deal going for us, which was all right. He worked hard for it. Well, anyway, these Pendleton Roundup come around, and we was there, and this Indian, and a big old Indian, a nice-looking Indian, had big long braids, and a cowboy hat on. And he was really a good-looking Indian, and he had a cute little wife. She always wore a shawl, and she did beautiful beadwork. She had a little band around her head, and a beautiful handbag, beaded, and she'd done that work herself. But anyway, they came in and we had banana cream pie, and Mona Hurst was a beautiful baker. She baked this banana cream pie, and he had a piece of it. And so he liked it so well, he had ate the whole piece, whole pie. And the old Indian lady was kind of embarrassed. But you know what? Those people, those old Indians stopped in there almost every Pendleton Roundup for years later. And they used to bring a bunch of Indians with them. And then, of course, we got one of the first Class H license in the state after, you know, it was dry for a while. And then the state had, you could sell it by the drink, so we got the second one.
Is that
Built on the banquet room because there wasn't any place in town for him to have these banquets and things. So he built a banquet room, and we had receptions there. Mr. Rogers, they had a big reception, a beautiful reception for their girl. And Dr. Frick had a nice reception for him. And of course, Dewey and I had our golden wedding anniversary in there.
Tell what it was like to work downtown and what kind of hours that you put in.
Oh, I worked sometimes from about 5 o'clock until about 2 in the morning.
Uh-huh.
And that was really a rough time because that's, and when the Mexicans were here, which was every summer, the taverns would close, and here they'd come from the taverns, and
To eat?
and they'd be drunk when they come in. So I would run and lock the door whenever they'd close.
Didn't you open at 5?
Yes. Dad would come over about 4:30 and get his meat cut or what he needed for lunch and get lunch started, and then Mona would come and she'd take over. And so we had one round for about 30 years, over 30 years. We worked it that way.
What were your busiest times of the year?
Oh, it was payday. It was hunting season. That was our busiest time. And one time it was hunting season, and people were standing out on the street to come in. And we just had to open the door when 4 went out to let 4 people come in.
Well, I remember you always had a big New Year's Eve party.
Yes, that was one of the things we had to have. We'd get hats and whistles and confetti, and it was a mess to clean up. Got old confetti all over every place. But we had, everybody in Dayton was good to us. We just had a good business.
And when did
And
Dad...
you can't stay in a business for 30 years and lose money every year. You
That's
have to
right.
be making money to be there that long.